Discover Help presents Stress-Free Living with Ray Samich and Mr. Stress-Free Ratanjit S. Sandhi. This audio program is an unscripted and unrehearsed conversation between Ray and Ratanjit. It is shared with you in hope of adding value to your life. We encourage you to listen to this program in its entirety to receive the full impact of its message. Sit back, relax, open your heart, mind, and soul to this edition of Stress-Free Living.
This is Stress-Free Living. Hello, everybody. I'm Ray Samich, and I'd like to introduce everyone to my dear radio colleague and spiritual brother, Ratanjit Sandhi. Ratanjit, how are you today?
Wonderful, Ray. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. And while many people watch these shows and listen to these shows after the fact because of our big library of them, for those of our listeners who have been listening steadily, we have not been live for a few weeks due to travels and health and a number of other things. So we want to welcome all of our live listeners here on the radio back to us today and let you know that we're here going strong. And of course, all of the shows are on our YouTube channel, Stress-Free Living Radio. Just do a search on that, Stress-Free Living Radio on YouTube, and you can catch about 100 shows that we have out there. And we actually intend, when I find some spare time, to go back into the archives and place a number of the other shows. Ratanjit, I probably should ask you, over the years, have we ever done a count? Have you ever done a count? It has to be well over 500 programs or so that we have done over the years. Probably more than that, right?
More than that.
More than that. 1,000? I don't know.
We started in 95.
Okay.
So if you take every year, there are 52
50.
Saturdays.
Right.
So if
Right.
you take even 40%, which we did live, and most of the other were recorded, so 40 times, how many years?
1,500 times less 40 times 40%. That's in the neighborhood of 650 shows, something like that. We have out there 700 shows.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we got to go out one day and bring all those out from the archives. When fortunately we weren't recording visually, so people won't have to see how much older I have gotten. You haven't changed at all over those 28 years, but if they looked at me, I went from a little boy to an old man.
I'm hiding under the turban.
There you go, right? Okay, so let's get into the show here. Enough of an introduction, and I'm intrigued about this, Ratanjit. We came up with this topic even before we took the little break, because the real world, to be successful in this world, to get anywhere, to really be able to communicate and build your network of people that you're there for, whether it's for personal reasons or for professional reasons, to have that group of people that you can count on. Empathy is so critically important. The ability to connect with these people emotionally, that they can be your friends, they can be your counted, trusted on allies. And the devious people have figured that out. So there is fake empathy all around us. And that's what led to the title, Cold-Blooded Empathy. You think of a cold-blooded killer, a cold-blooded empathy, okay, because it's just devious. And they try to lure you into thinking they're your friend or they're your ally, they're your trusted confidant, and then you get stabbed in the back, okay? We'd like to talk about this because I'd like to know, are those intentional from the beginning? I mean, I know there's all different kinds and shapes and sizes of this, but could it be that there's some trusted friends that then turn their back on each other and become ruthless enemies? Is it always a plan? Does it matter how we act in those situations? We being hopefully the good guy in that relationship? Could that turn a cold-blooded killer into a kind-hearted soul? Or is it helpless, hopeless? You know, there's so many things that we can talk about this, because this really, unfortunately, is real. How do we even handle it? Do we just accept this as a fact of life and say that, there's going to be people out there that are going to take advantage of us, and that's on them, and we just continue to do the best we can and add value where we can and let those bygones be bygones. I think it's an interesting topic for us to talk about today. Where do you want to start?
My goodness, you you have so many wonderful questions about this empathy, and they all need to be addressed. But before we go, let's understand what is empathy. Empathy is I am able to put myself into your shoes and realize your feelings of pleasure, your pains, your suffering, your ideas. And that is, in one sense, I become one with you. That's when I get true empathy. True empathy will give you the very similar pain feeling as you are feeling. I can feel your pain. So we basically in our society realize we more or less say, I feel your pain, I understand you, but you don't. You basically say these things for the sake of saying. This is because it reflects that you have empathy. And no matter how hard, there's one side of this. The other side is, no matter how hard you try to be empathetic or how many instruction you give to your children to be empathetic and tell them, have empathy. It's not a command-based situation that you can have empathy. Either you have empathy is a condition which is a consequence of having no ego, basically, and becoming one with other person. That's only place when you will have empathy. Ray?
Well, you just, for as much as I started with, as many comments and paths that I started with, you've just entered a new one into the role, because I was assuming empathy is real. And then we have all these devious players that are pretending to be empathetic. And that's where I was going. You've now introduced the idea that even most of the empathy that's in the world that is supposed to be sincere probably isn't real either, because of the ego factor and pride and things like that. So in some ways, that's cold-blooded empathy too, because it is under the auspice of being real, and it really isn't real. It's just pretend empathy without having all, the ego factor out of the mix. So I don't know where to start now. I guess let's start with that. Let's start with the people that we try to be empathetic with each other, and our intentions are honorable, and yet we're not quite hitting the mark on that. If I genuinely care about somebody, and I think the best example that we've all had is when, very sad to say, but we go to a funeral parlor because somebody's lost a loved one. And it's the saddest moment for most people, and we share that sadness that they've lost somebody important to them, and we say, I understand, I know how you feel, I'm so sorry for your loss. And we genuinely can feel their pain if we've lost somebody ourselves. If we've lost our mother and she was important to us, and this person that we go to lost their mother, we really can relate. I mean, we can understand that. We can feel the same kind of a loss that they are experiencing. Why isn't that genuine empathy? Why is ego even a factor in that connection?
Because you're basically, or we are part and basically insecure. There is no person on earth who is not insecure. We are all insecure. And the more insecure we are, the higher the ego happens. As a cover up of your insecurity, you have ego. The more ego you have, the less empathetic you are. So, no wonder we have more than one shooting a day. So many youngsters are killed, and our politicians are basically sending us prayer and um, thoughts for that, and they don't mean anything. So they are never able to feel the pain. They're never able to feel the empathy. That is why nothing is done. It's not a question of uh, your brain. It's a question of once you realize the pain a family goes through after losing a young child of 5 years, because they would do something together. And they do not do anything because there is complete lack of empathy. Now, this verifies the highest insecurity you will find in elected officials and the highest ego you will find in elected officials, because that is how they want to be somebody. They want to have power. This gives them security indirectly, because they are so insecure, they are gravitate towards power. So we have in our uh, arsenal, most of the people, I'm not saying 100%, there are some good people, and most of the people who enter politics, they enter because of their insecurity, because of their ego. And they are the people who will really cannot have empathy because they are parked in insecurity and as a consequence, ego.
I don't disagree at all. And I think we can pick on politicians, they deserve to be picked on, but we can also say that about a lot of, CEOs and a lot of very wealthy people who have never experienced hardship. They've never gone through not having a job because they've probably come up in a family where they always had money and they were never worried about how they're going to pay the rent or how they're going to put food on the table for their kids and all those scenarios. And there's, if you can't relate, if you are in a position where you can't understand what your employees are going through or your subordinates are going through, I think your point is extremely valid. I want to, if you can, please put that aside though for just a second and go back to my example, because this is the way, the real people, not the politicians, not the small percentage of society that's a CEO, or the small percentage of society that's very wealthy that never knew hardship, hardship of financial means. And that's not saying that they don't have other hardships, but that don't have financial hardship. I brought the example up of the funeral home. Okay. Do you agree or disagree that if I go to my friend in a funeral home and I say, I'm genuinely sorry for your loss, I understand, I feel your pain, I feel your loss, because I lost my father and you just lost your mother. I understand what you're going through. Don't you think that's real empathy? Don't you think, even if I have an ego, even if I am coming there with a huge ego, in that moment, don't you think the genuine empathy is real?
These are the words our civilization have taught us to say. We repeat this word. I'm very sorry. I understand your pain. I'm very sympathetic. And extent of pain you experience at that moment depends on how less your ego is at that point, how less insecurity you have at that point. So you have certain amount of empathy present in you when you have a very close friend or very close relative, but it lasts only for a short amount of time. Again, your insecurity, your ego, by the time you drive away from that, comes back and you lose all that complete feeling. I before I go further, I want to validate what I'm saying.
Okay.
There was a article on neuroscience related in New York Times in 2014. I think it was in the month of July, that probably on a weekend. And the title of the article was Powerful and Cold-Hearted. Powerful and cold-hearted. And interestingly, this article said that we have in our brain what we call as mirror neurons. Mirror means they are reflective. They reflect other person's pain into our brain. Mirror neuron activity, when it is higher activity, then we have higher reflection transmitted to us. So that is why when you see the youngster who have no ego, 2-year-old, 3-year-old, 4-year-old, and basically they are playing around, because of these mirror neurons, they are able to copy your habits. They do not understand the lecture you give them. So if you want to cultivate any habits in your little ones, you have to have those habits in you. If you practice something else and tell him I'm not home, and the little kids knows you are at home. Mm-hmm. So you are practicing lies in front of the child, and you tell him, don't lie. Mm-hmm. So that doesn't happen. That would not make any difference. So this, because of the mirror neuron, that is how we reflect the habits which we notice around us. So they did in this article, they mentioned they did an experiment. They gathered people randomly and divided them into two groups, depends on if they wanted to write an essay on their achievements, on their successes, and what they are very proud of. Or they wanted to write an essay on what difficulty they felt, what struggles they felt, and what they are very grateful for. So when they wrote those essays, and basically, when you write these essays, your mind is into that particular paradigm. So people who wrote essay on their successes, what they're proud of, their mind was transferred into pride and ego. And these people who wrote essay on gratefulness and what they're able to, how they were able to handle the difficulties, their mind was less into pride and more into gratefulness. Now, when they wired their brains to measure the activities of mirror neurons, the biggest surprise was they did not find any activity in the people who were very proud and have ego. They found higher activity in the people who were proud, who were grateful for their achievements and difficulties. So it is known that empathy, which is evil, when you are able to reflect through or mirror neurons somebody's pains and suffering, that's when we get empathy. When you are sparked in ego and pride, mirror neuron activity is minimized and you lose the capability of reflecting others' pains and suffering. Right?
I've heard that. You've shared that story several times before, but it's so hard hitting. I'm glad you did again. It's very relevant to this topic. We need to take a short break. When we come back, I want to go more in depth with that, because whether you believe in spiritual conversation, or whether you believe in science, it appears like empathy is a major component of both lines of thought. And your mirror neurons discussion there just kind of proves that on the science side. So we're going to come back and really talk more in depth about empathy. Is it real? Is it cold-blooded, even when we try to think it's real? Is it pretend, manufactured empathy? And then eventually, I hope to get to the topic that I originally was at, is what about the people that know that it's manufactured and they're using that as an exploitation of humanity? Lots of things to talk about on this edition of Stress Free Living. Stay with us. We'll be right back. Oh, wow. We're going to take 4 shows to get all this in, Ratanjit. Doug or Dr. Jagjit, any comments?
He's fine. Everything is going fine.
Okay, thank you. How about you, Doug?
Yeah, I'm just trying to take all of this in.
Okay.
I think you guys always do that to me, but I think I try to picture this, and it's always a little bit of all of it. I mean, the funeral, there is that empathy there for somebody, and I think some people it comes more natural to them. Maybe it's because of what Ratanjit said is their ego versus proudness and versus all what, but and other people are a little bit more, how can I say it, cold-hearted. They don't, they might feel that, but it's just they don't really have that feeling like some other people do, just almost as a natural thing. But anyway, it's a great discussion. We'll see where this goes.
But are you feeling our pain this morning?
Yes, I feel for you.
All right. Then you got the empathy for us. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
I think this is one of those shows that's just going to go down its own path. I don't know. We'll just take it one step at a time and see how it works out. But make sure you unmute yourself, brother. Somehow you got muted. We got to be able to hear your words of wisdom. There you go. Now we got your back. All right. I think we're in our last ad here. Last one, Jacob? Yep. Okay. Coming back in just a couple of seconds. It's time. Go into the divine internet, Ratanjit. We need some inspiration here. We are back on Stress Free Living. Thank you so much for being with us today. Yours truly, Ray Samich and Ratanjit Sandhi, talking. Our title is Cold-Blooded Empathy. Empathy, such an important part of life. As we get older, we realize how essential it is to be able to have empathy in our lives. But is it real, or is it manufactured? Is it something that we just pretend to have because we really don't connect with people at the level that we should? Ratanjit, you brought up a great example there with the scientific validation of mirror neurons, meaning that you can't reflect somebody else's pain, somebody else's feelings and emotions scientifically. That is impossible if you're not in a mode of gratefulness, of humility, of true kindness. If you're overwhelmed by ego, if you have pride, then you're just pretending to be empathetic. It's scientifically impossible. So we've talked a couple of times about that funeral home exchange. And I have to agree with you. In the moment of the words being spoken, in my case, my words are heartfelt. I really do feel the pain. But sad to say, you're right. When I'm in my car leaving that place, or even just walking out the door of the funeral home, it's out of my mind already. I'm already thinking about business and my family and my responsibilities and everything else. I don't carry that with me. If it was true empathy, I guess I wouldn't be past that so quickly, would I? I mean, I would still have that sadness, that feeling in my heart for much more than 3 minutes. Is that a
Absolutely.
true assessment?
Absolutely. Now, the fundamentally, to understand this thing further, where does the insecurity and ego comes in us? Why,
Well, I
we
think I know, just because we've talked about it. It's because of our own lifespan, right? And knowing that we are not going to be here. So as part of that whole thought process,
whole
we
thought
have,
process, because we never are told in throughout our education system or during our upbringing or anything that there is other than anything else to me than this human body.
Right.
So always I am thinking in terms of this human body, and this human body, we know it knows that it is going to subjected to pain, suffering, and eventually is going to die. It's always going to be part in that insecurity. Some people have more insecurity than others. And so when you have people, so many things temporarily give you security, your close family contacts, your wealth, and your all these things give you temporary security. But then the as the time goes, our body ages, and suddenly we doesn't matter how much wealth we have, how much family we have, how many expertise we have, it starts to deteriorate and eventually is going to die. So we comprehend that reality, and forever it, no matter who you are, whether you are a billionaire or you are a scientist or you are a politician or you are a priest or you are whoever you are going to be always insecure, thinking yourself as the human body. What else is there to think? We never are taught in our school, in our education, that the real us is the force which gives us the life. And that is completely secure. That would be there before it enters the human body, it will be there. So it is only in that mode you have security. And in that mode, you have no ego. In that mode, you are one, because that force is same as in me, as in you. So that brings oneness, and naturally you have higher empathy in that mode. Highest empathy is present in the mode when your brain is being operated with a knowledge that you are the force which enlivens you, not the human body. You reside in this human body, right?
Couple of things. First of all, you presented a factual basis for the mirror neurons with the New York Times article. I need to give a plug here for one of my all-time favorite books. And I don't know, Ratanjit, if you've even read it, although I've mentioned it to you before too, and I'd be happy to share it with you. It's called Proof of Heaven. It's written by Dr. Eben Alexander, who is a brain neurosurgeon, very scientific based, was not a believer of oneness, was not a believer of anything divine or spiritual. He was 100% science, and Harvard Medical School genius, very renowned, and went through an incredible medical situation where now he is one of the biggest advocates of all time for the fact that we are one with what he experienced, and that there is much more to us than the human body. It's just an amazing story. And I've listened to the Audible book 3 times and read it twice, because I enjoy it so much. And it is so inspiring and proof bearing that what you talk about is absolutely true. We are not just a human life that ends at whatever age we die and there's no more of us. It's just unmistakable ultimate proof in this book. So anybody who's fearful of death has to read this book. Anybody who is afraid of dying, anybody who is afraid of the reality that we're just a human body here for a short time, has to read this book called Proof of Heaven, Dr. Eben Alexander. Just listened to it again last week in a 16-hour ride in my car, and just an amazing story. Secondly, when we talk about true empathy, so we have to have this awareness that we're here forever. Okay, so there is no fear of death because we shouldn't have that insecurity. I would agree with that. But we get so caught up, Ratanjit, in the world. We get so caught up in other factors, our finances, our jobs, our families, our health, our needs and wants and fears, other than our own demise. Okay, even if we live in oneness, even if we live with that ultimate knowledge of oneness, don't you see how the earth, how the world still kind of gets its claws into us and says, but you've got to be worried about your wife who's sick. You've got to be worried about performing at the job or you're going to get fired. You've got to worry about the fact that you just were in a car accident and you have a $5,000 bill you didn't know you were going to have to pay. Don't you see how those could still cause you concern and grief and fear and worry that still don't allow us to have maybe that purest empathy?
You are absolutely right. The fact is that two people who are exactly in the same condition, one is going to worry a lot than other. Why?
I hope you tell me. I don't know.
Fundamentally, we do not live our knowledge. We live our habits. Once you have formulated habits of constantly afraid of, even twins who are born in the same family, who have given love by the same parents, the same conditions, and they are identical. They cannot differentiate. They cannot, and when they go to same college, same institution, and one of them is more secure than other.
Mhm.
How? Because what happens is, once you pick up this habit of insecurity, it grows on you. And your habits are, because I mentioned that before, habits are formed by the part of our brain which is called basal ganglia. So it is designed to give us efficiency. Whatever we repeat, it automatically does without thinking, because it makes you more efficient. You don't have to utilize your thinking power in everything which you have been repeating.
Mhm.
So it is the same thing with the thought, the same thing with the habit. So that is why we recognize a certain person, a certain personality by their habits, because they behave same. Information, when you go to read a book, when you attend a lecture, when you understand something, your mind understand, this, my empathy comes from becoming one. Oneness is where I should live. But you haven't formed a habit of living in oneness. You still live with the knowledge of oneness, but not the habit of oneness. So you will never get the benefits of oneness thought process because you are living your habits, Ray.
So whether it's oneness or anything, what I think I've just heard you say is that it's one thing to buy into something. It's one thing to appreciate the value of a thought process or a philosophy or even a way of life.
No,
But
it's
unless
more than buying into oneness. There are so many, we buy into this thing. Every time you even write books about that, you lecture about that, but you have not cultivated those habits in you,
that's
and you will never live those habits.
thank you. That's where I was trying to go is even if you are an expert on it, as you said, you write books on it and you lecture on it, but if you don't convert that into how you live, if you don't turn that into a habit that says, this is what I do in this situation, this is how I act in this situation, then you're really not living oneness, even if everything about you says, yes, it's good, it makes sense, I believe in it, I lecture on it, I preach on it, but unless I live it, then and develop the habits for it, then I really don't have it.
But that's why many of the preachers, you have learned from them, they end up going to jail because in their real life,
Yeah.
they live their habits.
Well, the doctors, you always point out how the doctors are the worst offenders. They have the lowest, the briefest life cycle, and they know everything about health and how to stay healthy, and yet they die at the youngest ages, many of them. So that's a bit frustrating, though, isn't it? A bit demoralizing to think that we buy into this at this level. I mean, we really do accept it. I think most of the people that are listening and watching this show on a regular basis are saying, yeah, oneness makes perfect sense. I like that idea. It's really good. I'm going to do it. But there's still that jump that you actually have to live it in order to totally understand and be there where you need to be. In a way that's like, that last step is the biggest step. Let's take a break. I think you realize we need to do that. We're at the time where we have to take a second break in the show. We're going to come back and I don't know, go from here. See where the good Lord takes us. We'll be right back on this edition of Stress Free Living. All right, Doug, anything? Dr. Jack Jeet, help us. Where do we go from here?
Yeah, some people are definitely have a longer spell of empathy. Some people have a very short spell of empathy. That is what I observe. Sometimes one goes to a funeral and he remains sad for maybe 2 days or 3 days, while the other might be only just coming out of it. He might be a normal person. So it depends upon individual nature, which he has rightly articulated as habit. And if you watch that person at home also or in normal society, he will be always with the other people. He will be empathetic to everyone, even living people. So that part is just a comment on it.
So you agree it comes down to the habit that we practice for it. Yeah. Doug, anything quickly? Anything for us?
No, just still listening.
Right.
It's kind of interesting when Ratanjit throws it back to you, and I can see like, oh yeah, wow, how do I respond to what he just said?
I know. I need a moment to digest that.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, I need a moment here to digest this.
I'm with you. All right. All right, Ratanjit. We'll try to wrap this up here. We'll never wrap this up. We know there's going to be a part 2 of the show because we haven't gotten into the cold-blooded part.
Yeah.
I'm not surprised. Let's come back and dwell on that habit a little bit more. We are back on Stress Free Living. Ratanjit and Ray Samich with you. Thank you so much for being part of our program. Ratanjit, we only have a few minutes remaining here on this show, and I'd like to, I don't know, grasp this a little bit better. The idea of empathy being a habit is in itself a pretty profound idea, because
You cannot form a habit. Empathy is a byproduct of, when you drink something, your thirst is quenched. You
Right.
cannot have a habit of quenching the thirst. You can have a habit of drinking the water.
Oh, okay.
So you cannot have a habit of empathy. You can have a habit of not being part in ego and pride, and ultimately you will have empathy. So in order for you to park in, not park in ego and pride, is you have to be in oneness. Now, the good part is habit can be formed. Anything you do consecutively 40 times, 30 times, depends on a person, and it becomes a habit. So once you develop this habit in thinking in oneness, remaining part in oneness, you suddenly become more entrenched in this freedom from pride and ego, and you will have empathy. So there was a comment made by one of our listeners that some people have more empathy and some people have less empathy. When you go to funeral, some people would be sad for 2 days, 3 days, more times, and they would have more empathy. And obviously, the less ego you have, the more time you would have a empathy. It's a true empathy is feeling the pain you suffer. And most of the people, when they go to funeral and they become sad, many of them, it reminds them of their own death. They become more sad. Oh my goodness, this is coming to me. It's coming to my person. And many times they are sad not because of this. There are so many reasons to be sad. To have empathy is to know the pain of that person, and next step is to reduce that pain, to help them understand this lack of. Most of the time, when we get together with somebody who has lost a loved one, we increase their pain. We say, oh God, this person is gone and this happened. We don't reduce their pain, we increase their pain. That is not empathy. So it is a very complicated thought process when we call things which are not empathy as empathy. The true empathy cannot exist until you are completely part in oneness. Once you are, and to form a habit of living in oneness is what we have to do. Knowledge of oneness is never going to help you. And we have given an exercise to park us in oneness many times, and we will repeat at the end of this show also. Right?
So I'm going to introduce another different thought in this, as if we need one more place to go. But you just triggered something in my little brain. We're referring to empathy a lot here when we're feeling each other's pain. And empathy doesn't have to always be pain. Empathy can be experiencing the joy that somebody else feels, the opposite of pain.
Absolutely.
It could be all kinds of feelings, okay, that we
Yes.
relate to.
Yes.
But pain is the one that I think we connect to the most, because it's an emotion that gets us unlike any other. I mean, when again, we can all embrace that scene in the funeral parlor or in the church or mosque or whatever it is, where you're the tears of the loss and the finality of the human life death is something we can connect with for a friend or a loved one, family. Could it also be true that those things happen to force us to have the habit of removing ego? Could those, the immense pain that you do feel, could that be the trigger that breaks us from having the ego and having the pride? Is that maybe even part of the logic of the life cycle, that we break free of the habit of being frivolous and being thoughtless and being centered on money and success, when the reality of the pain of loss is so strong that it kind of shakes us up and says, what am I doing all this stuff for, when it's about people, it's about life, and it's about living? Do you think it could be coming in from that side in this process too, or am I just totally off base with that thought?
What happens is, there are people, when they lose a loved one, or wife or husband or a child or something, some people never get out of that pain.
Mm-hmm.
Many of those people go into depression. Okay.
Right.
That is not empathy. That is basically insecurity. Insecurity will cause pain and suffering for a longer time. So you become more insecure when you have lost your loved one. And that, because your security was tied to your husband or your wife or your children, and you lost that. So basically, it's all about insecurity, which gives you, and that is not empathy, that is pain and suffering. And once you develop that habit of living in that paradigm, ends up in depression.
What about the opposite of that? And I agree that happens. Your example is right on. But what about the people that use that, use that experience as a trigger to change, as a trigger to say, wow, what have I been doing with my life? There's a time when my human body isn't going to be here. I may or may not agree that I'm a permanent, a everlasting soul, but my human life is coming to an end at some point. What about the people that use that to change, to say, boy, I don't want to have this ego. I don't want to live like I've lived before with the wrong focal point. Is empathy a part of that too?
It's nothing to do with empathy. What happens is, I am part in myself, and I suddenly realize that I'm on this path. I'm trying to collect money, and this and this and this is not going to last because I'm going to die. Suddenly, this realization hits me, and I change my path. So it is again, self-oriented. It has nothing to do with empathy. Empathy is feeling the pain and suffering and doing something about it so that you can reduce that. You are helping somebody, you are getting their mind off of that, making them realize the loss is only of the body, loss is only of the money, loss is only of the situation, loss is only of a limb. Those things, once you make them realize, you reduce their suffering and their pain. Empathy takes you to the next step of doing something for somebody who you feel pain or joy. Either one is empathy. But when you modify your habits, your path, you are still part in how do I utilize this event for my own benefit?
Yeah, I agree. But I think if we have that revelation, if we have the realization, like you said, of somebody who experiences that pain or sees somebody else experience the pain, and it changes the way we live, changes the way we think, maybe changes our habits, then I think that puts us in a better position to be empathetic, right? Because we've reduced some of our own ego in terms of our power and our importance and our successes and our titles and all those things. And it's brought us down, reduced our level of ego so we could have more empathy. Could that, I guess maybe I'm just living in a dream world. I'm trying to find an easy way to change to empathy.
Ego is not necessary I'm feeling superior to you. Ego is also, negative ego is also make you inferior. It's all separating yourself from the universe is causing you ego. Unification with the universe through oneness is eliminating the ego. Ego, on the positive side, thinking I'm the greatest, many times can be very harmful. And many times when you are thinking negative, it is only harming you, but not harming others. But that is still part of the ego. You have less ego or more ego. Less ego means I think less of myself, but it's also ego. So ultimately, you get rid of all that by practicing and living in the habit of oneness. You are always going to be grateful. You are always going to know that you are here temporarily. You are here to add the highest value. Your purpose becomes clear to you. You are not accumulating wealth and accumulating these things to address your insecurity. You are constantly utilizing everything as gifted to you temporarily. You do not own anything. Your mindset becomes everything is gifted to me temporarily to add value, including your brain power, including my human body, including my resources, including my context. So ultimately, I'm here for a very short time to give back to this part of my experience of life to add the highest value, right?
Wow. You said you wanted to do to give some information. I don't know if we can do it in 30 seconds or if we should want to save that, because we're going to have to do part 2 of this show.
Yes,
okay,
I think it's a very simple. To form a habit of living in oneness, we basically do every morning, a certain time, the same event. So after getting ready, stand in front of the mirror and see what you see is a reflection of the human body. And suddenly realize that this is a gift given to me. An amazing things this human body is able to do. It produces its own blood. It have everything. And this is gifted to me. This gives you a feeling of gratefulness, which minimizes your ego. And then you close your eyes and open your eyes and look into your eyes, you see the force which enlivens this human body. This is the one force which enlivens you and enlivens everyone. When you come out of the exercise, you see in other person's eyes, you see the same force. That is unifies you with other persons without, and you practice living in oneness, right?
All right, with that, we do need to say goodbye. We're going to continue this talk about empathy and cold-blooded empathy in particular, get into that in our next show. Thank you so much for being with us. Ratanjit, thank you for taking us to places that we would otherwise never be able to go. We appreciate and love you. Thank you so much for your spending time with us today, and we look to talk with you again very soon. Remember, we're all playing the same game. Have a great day.
Thank you.
We are clear. And Jogesh, want to welcome you to our just the end of the program. Boy, you missed most of the thought process, but we're glad that you were here to join us at the end. Doug, thanks for being with us. And we lost Dr. Jagjit here just a few minutes ago.
Well, thank you. I still got few of the good tips how to really stand in front of the mirror and recognize yourself as a good soul from God, and I'm unifying with others. Yes, there are barriers from person to person. I feel all the time, sometimes, not always. And with some person you click very fast, with some persons you have some barrier. So I guess this exercise will help to get on well with others in the society around you. Well, that's a good tip. Thank you.
You know, eventually you have to realize there are no good people or bad people. They have bad habits.
Yeah.
So they can change their habit and become better. So you can help them changing their habits. And basically, before you can do that, you have to gain trust in them. You have to gain confidence in them so they can begin to listen to you. They can begin to understand you. So it doesn't matter whether person is bad or good. We label a person as criminal or good or bad for life. That is basically based on their one habit, we taint them throughout their life. We should be able to change them.
Right, that's right. But sometimes in the organization, the top bosses have really high egos when they're operating in their corporate world or the official world. The top bosses have a real high ego when they are operating in the official ways. But when you meet them over a cup of tea, then their personality is different. I think then they are approachable. And then what you said, to talk at a soul level or interact with them makes more sense. But once a person is in a high ego state, sitting in his official chair, and then you make a point, sometimes it doesn't get through to them. So I was wondering what is the best way sometimes to get through them.
So they've formed a habit of being in ego, especially that habit is triggered by once they walk into that office, once they sit on the chair, there are certain habits of ego fall into their voice changes, their mannerism changes, their everything changes. Whereas, so again, you become friends with them and you begin to able to share those difficulties, those situations with them. They begin to listen to you.
Right. One thing I would like to add, today I was reading in the spiritual column, it comes here in Times of India. One person mentioned that you should not feel yourself you are perfect. If you feel you are perfect, then when you meet another person, then you look down upon that person in the process. But all the souls are equal in different stages of development. So you should give a chance to other person, and then only your ego will be less and you will be more communicative. So never feel you are perfect all the time.
those are all temporary solutions. The real solution is until you see others as divine souls, divine power, which enlivens you. You begin to see that power in them. You don't have the respect in them. You respect in you for them. So as a consequence, you label them less or more based on their habits or their education or their title or their which is all temporary.
Exactly. Yes.
Doug, any final comments from you today?
Well, that last discussion is very good, and the whole thing, you get a much better feeling about empathy, actually, and the whole thing we've been talking about, we're going to get to next week, and I can't wait to listen to next week about the individuals. Is it real empathy, or they just want to get something from you? And my gut feeling is it's probably more likely that it's not real empathy when somebody does that. But on the other hand, if it's somebody you know or they know you, it could be. It could be real empathy, but they're trying to get something, with you. Maybe they're trying to help you. Who knows? But anyway, this is 347 was a little bit too deep for me, but it just generates a lot of just thoughts in my mind about, I never even gave a lot of this stuff a thought. And now after listening to both of you talk, it's like, oh, I guess that's pretty true, and that's just, you think about that. So I love it. I enjoy these conversations. I love listening to both of you talk about it. It opens up my mind a lot. And I'm an old man, and I still try to get this new stuff into my brain. So here we are. So thank you very much. That's all I got to say.
All right. Thank you, Ratanjit, for introducing all this.
Thank you.
Taking us down a whole different path than I expected when I started, for sure.
Jogesh, join us earlier, so we'd love to have your participation from the
Yeah.
Sure,
Yeah,
I'll try. Actually, it's a evening time here, so we sometimes get out and for a stroll or something. But yes, I'll try.
Very good.
Thank you.
All right, well, join us for next week, part 2.
One question, Race man, maybe you can put up a question in this forum is empathy is associated with qualities of in leadership. And here we are talking empathy from person to person. Obviously, that is a trait. Is it an inherent trait, or it can be developed, or it can come with the surrounding of good people around you? What is really how to evolve more empathy in your personality?
You're talking about leader, how to become a true leader?
No, leadership says good leaders have a strong component in their personality for empathy. Then only the people are good following, they follow well in their path along with them in the team.
Oh,
Otherwise,
absolutely. If you cannot relate to somebody, they will be less like to follow your orders.